Start a conversation. It's easier than you know. Start a conversation. Nobody should feel alone.
Welcome to Super Connected Conversations. Today I am honored to introduce a remarkable individual, Dr. Sanjiv Nichani, OBE. With over 3 decades of pediatrics, Dr. Nichani has dedicated much of his career to advancing healthcare for children, particularly in critical care and congenital heart disease through his work with Healing Little Hearts. But it's his recent work on the Screen-demic that we'll focus on today. Dr. Nichani has coined this term to describe the rising epidemic of mental health challenges and developmental issues in children and teenagers due to excessive screen time and social media use. He has launched a powerful campaign to raise awareness that offers practical solutions to parents, teachers, and health professionals, and his 5-a-day infographic has now been accepted by the NHS. Dr. Nichani is a member of the newly formed campaign group Health Professionals for Safer Screens, and his insights into the effects of screen dependency make him an essential voice in this conversation. I'm thrilled to speak to him today. Hello, Sanjiv. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you, Tim?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming to have this conversation. I've got a short list of topics to talk about, but of course, they're all going to be related to smartphone use and screen use. And to get us started, I just thought I'd ask you first, when did you first notice the potential harmful nature of smartphones on children?
I think I've been seeing it more and more in the last 2 or 3 years, particularly in my clinics. I've been seeing teenagers who presenting with headaches, with lethargy, with listlessness, with irritability. And when you delve deeper into what's happening in the family life, school life, etc., one of the common features is that far too many, around 30% of teenagers, are spending 4 to 6 hours each and every day on screens and on social media. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is what I'm seeing in early childhood. Development problems, delays in communication, delays in coordination, delays or problems with interaction. I've been seeing non-verbal children. And what I mean by that is a toddler, 2 or 3-year-old, walking into my clinic with normal mobility, normal coordination, overtly looking normal, but they don't say a word. Not only do they don't say a word, they come in with this glazed expression on their faces. And they don't look at you. It's almost like you're not in the room. And they are immediately attracted to inanimate objects. And as a matter of routine, I always ask about technology use, whatever the age is. And more often than not, these nonverbal children are spending their entire waking hours in front of a screen. So their entire waking hours in front of a screen, passively watching something on the screen. When they're eating, they're on the screen. When they are in the car, they're on the screen. When they're out with their parents, they're on the screen, in supermarkets, etc., etc. So basically, what I'm witnessing, which is what got me to delve into this reading, research, etc., is a phone-based childhood or a phone-controlled childhood, which is having lots of ramifications, lots of knock-on effects. And that's why I've coined the phrase the Screen-demic. The Screen-demic is the epidemic of mental health illness in children and young people secondary to excessive screen time and social media, as well as early developmental problems with communication, with interaction, secondary to spending too much time on screens. And that's basically from my observations at the cold face, my alarm at what I'm seeing has got me reading and exploring this topic.
And I think those of us who know about your work are really grateful that you are covering this topic. I understand that it's in not a widely explored in the NHS as yet. Is that right?
No, yeah, sadly it isn't. And when I first started in earnest in November last year, so about a year ago, I wrote to a number of high profile and senior people in the NHS. And I got very disappointing responses. I wrote to the chief medical officer who was good enough to reply to me, and I said, the Department of Education is looking at this. I wrote to the national clinical lead for children and young people who had a Zoom call with me, but basically said to me, there's nothing you can do, to my great and extreme disappointment. So I have been trying to raise a profile in Leicester with the public health people, and yet, as yet, hasn't got much traction. Where I have had traction, and this is pertaining to the 5-a-day infographic, is I presented the Screen-demic talk as well as the 5-a-day infographic to NHS England mental health leads, which they've accepted the infographic, and it's on one of the.
We'll talk about your infographic in detail.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, the interest, the involvement, the alarm that I have and my colleagues have, and particularly health professionals for safer screens share very deeply, is not shared by the wide medical establishment, to my great frustration.
Yeah. Which, to me, although I'm also rare, I suppose, in my profession as well, I'm also surrounded by a majority of people, whether they're musicians, artists, or filmmakers, who would feel it was maybe an overreaction to be talking about smartphones as a dangerous substance or something. So I understand a little bit. I can empathize to a degree about maybe feeling a little like the lunatic on the hill.
Yes.
Go on.
Sorry.
No.
Now I want to say, I do lots of talks about this, and I think what's underpinning all of that is the fact that compelling research has only been released in the last 12 to 24 months. So the starting gun in this campaign was fired by the most senior doctor in the US, who last year, May 23, issued an advisory to the American public saying that they are seeing a very clear link between mental health, the astronomical increase in mental health problems, and smartphone screen time usage. And he looked at the evidence leading up to May 23. And since then, things have progressed even further. Just this year, there have been 4 or 5 or more very large studies looking at the effects in early childhood. So to be fair to the skeptics, the ones you described, the ones in the medical establishment, they are not aware of this research, which is why the campaign, your campaign, our campaign, the campaign to hopefully give the name of Screen-demic a life and entity so people understand what we are in the middle of, will start making people sit up and take notice as to what we are in the middle of.
A lot of it is quite complex because, and I've spoken to your colleagues about this as well, that it's the device itself and the information on the apps that are on the device there has to be a distinction between those two things, isn't there? Right. And I just wondered if you feel that intense sort of exposure to algorithmic processes on apps actually is there evidence that affects cognitive function in I think children or adults? I'd just be interested to know.
There is evidence. There is evidence of two or three things. One is a brain strain. So whilst the brain is not a muscle, the brain behaves like a muscle. And what I mean by that is, after functioning at full tilt for the entire day, when we sleep, sleep is actually not a passive process like most people think of it as. It's an active process where the brain gets replenished, it regenerates, it gets restored, memories get embedded, etc. And what happens when you're constantly bombarding the brain? It does not get that time to rest, to replenish, to regenerate. So first of all, it's the brain strain. The brain is just not getting the ability to switch off because there's something constantly being bombarded onto it with all these flashing images, TikTok, etc. The other thing is these algorithms, which we referred to, they're addictive. And they cause the release of the hormone dopamine, which makes you feel elated, which makes you feel good, even happy. You think you're feeling happy, positive. And these algorithms, which is how the various apps work, Instagram, TikTok, etc. You look at something, you scroll through, it makes you feel good. And when you put it down, the dopamine level drops. And to replenish that dopamine level, you want to keep picking it up again and again and again and again. That becomes repetitive behavior leading to this addiction. And again, very few people know that these algorithmic apps are actually addictive, which goes back to the ignorance out there in the general public. Because everybody's doing it, because everybody is oblivious of the dangers, it's sort of carrying on as normal. It's invaded our lives, it's embedded into our lives, it's second nature now. But it's only now that we're beginning to realize the man effects, the brain drain, the problem, the strain, the problem with sleep, the dopamine release, and there's now a syndrome called dopamine depletion. So the dopamine levels are so low, it leaves the person feeling lethargic, listless, lack of attention, lack of energy, etc., etc. This is dopamine related.
You keep saying that word dopamine, and I have experience several decades ago of overcoming addiction to drugs and then working with addicts in alternative treatment therapies in Thailand, actually. And I've had experience of my own and many other people who have gone through what you described, dopamine depletion. That you're having such, I guess, overload of dopamine in a single experience, which might, be with illegal drugs or tobacco or alcohol, and you can sort of visibly. I've seen with adults, can see the effects of that. What's it like for children in terms of? I can't think of an instance that I know of anyway, in history where children are being exposed, apart from sugar, I suppose, as a stimulant, which I think exhausts or produces dopamine, doesn't it? What can you say about the effects of an dopamine release via algorithmic processes on the child's mind?
In older children and teenagers, the effects are, as I've described, inattention, lethargy, listlessness, lack of interest, general apathy. And going back to your point about different types of addiction, there are now very sophisticated brain scans which have looked at brains of teenagers and young adults who spend hours and hours, in other words, are addicted to social media and apps. And they have shown that there are changes in those brains, in the brain scans, which are similar to changes in the brains of other addictions. So this is utterly fascinating. And there are these abnormal changes in the brain. And in fact, when teenagers are asked to come off and reduce the amount of exposure to screens and social media apps, they almost have withdrawal symptoms.
At what age are you thinking of?
Teenagers.
You're teenagers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they have withdrawal symptoms. And so I always advise, just like you do with an addict, make very small changes and reduce things slowly. So I saw a child who I've already mentioned this, non-verbal child, and I said to the parents, you can't go from, let's say, a 16-hour exposure to screens to zero, because that's going to cause very major withdrawal symptoms, manifest as tantrums, irritability, etc., etc. You need to start by addressing one aspect of this screen use. So start off when you're in the car on short journeys. Start off when you are going to the supermarket for a short visit. Don't give your child a screen. And then slowly curtail the amount of time during the day. And then at some point, when you're making progress, tackle the meal times. So pretty much the same thing, weaning down very slowly, very gently.
Gosh, it's almost a bit frightening when you think about it, that it is such a normal part of life. But then when you think of it, that you go that extra step and you realize it's only really been, it's not even 20 years really, since I think smartphones first sort of 2007, certainly the first iPhone, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you know, the App Store is pretty much controlled by Apple. Developers have to deal with Apple the same way as podcasters have to deal with Apple. They kind of have the monopoly on that. What does it feel like to be a pediatrician working in this area and seeing children with problems related to screen use, which will often be something like Snapchat or, you know, similar apps? Do you have a feeling towards the companies for whom it is kind of normal business as usual?
Great anger, huge frustration, great anger. I think they are unethical. If you want me to be honest with you, I've said a number of times in unguarded moments that, as far as I'm concerned, what Mark Zuckerberg et al. Have created, they should be tried for crimes to humanity, because what they have unleashed is, in my opinion, shocking. It's terrible. And we've sleepwalked into this problem. And, you know, a lot of parents say, well, is it too late for my child, etc.? No, it isn't. But to turn the Titanic round is going to take a long time. In the meantime, the damage is going to be carrying on until everybody wakes up, and starting with the government, wakes up and realizes that this is a very, very massive, significant problem, and we need to do something fairly drastic about this. So there has to be systemic change and societal change. When I see this in my clinics, I despair.
Yeah.
That people are completely oblivious to what is going on and what is happening to their young child and young children and teenagers. And I despair for parents because A, they're ignorant, B, they see it around them, so they think it's the norm, and C, they're helpless.
And when we say ignorant, it's not a fault or an accusation. It's just the information isn't available, is it?
That's right.
Not that it's not
absolutely.
It's not the fault of anyone.
Indeed, and I always say to parents, bringing up children is extremely hard, particularly in this day and age, when so many parents are working. Both parents are often working. You know, the old adage, "It takes a village to bring up a child," is particularly true today, because both parents are working so often. And I say it's not your fault, because it's become the norm. It's become embedded in life. in our lives. But at the same time, you've got to lead by example. And that's the only way we can get back to a reasonable, moderate, sensible position on screen time and social media app use.
Just going back a little bit to the effects on brain development. I know from my own experiences that once I'd conquered my addiction when I was much younger, it's probably taken until now, I'd say maybe 20 years for neural pathways and ways of thinking which were not happy or healthy and have held me back in my life, I think, as a young man. I think it's taken until now to feel that that I can function with a reasonable positive outlook on life in general, but a lot of the neural pathways that I formed with because of my exposure to substances in my youth. Is it a similar thing for a young child that has that kind of effect on their brains with neural pathways? Is it less worrisome? Is it I'm trying to think of somebody, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 that's being stimulated constantly by what you describe as the algorithmic processes through a smartphone. What if they become aware of how that's affected them? How long could it take? I mean, sure, I'm sure it'll be different for everyone, but as an idea, does that?
Yeah. So children's brains are thought to be more plastic, and if you look at the anatomy and brain development goes on is at accelerated speed in early childhood, but it's still going on until late teens. So because of that plasticity, if they moderate their use and change their habits, and they start to do things like more exercise, more activity, your creativity is what I think has really helped you.
Okay.
So focus on something different, which is healthy, be it something creative, be it something in the arts, or a physical hobby, which takes a lot of their time. Because there are studies which show that children who have a serious hobby, a sport, exercise regularly, it shows positive changes in the brain. And in fact, parts of the brain enlarge secondary to healthy exercise. And parts of the brain which are affected by the excessive screen time, social media use, they start to normalize. There was a very large study in Taiwan, nearly 2 million participants. And they concluded that those who were physically active had less mental health difficulties, less ADHD, less depression, less anxiety, and were better adjusted. So this ongoing regular exposure to exercise is not just good for the heart, the lungs, the muscles, etc., but it's equally good for the brain. This is another relatively new concept. So in adults, the advice for those who are depressed, for instance, is don't stay home. Go out, get some fresh air, go into nature. That is healing. That's transformative. So there are lots of things you can do in your environment to negate the negative effects of any addiction, pretty much. And because the brains are still developing until the late teens, it takes less time than it took you.
Okay, yeah. So there is a way out because
absolutely, yeah.
But it needs to be sort of addressed and be made aware of to begin with.
Yes, there needs to be a very major public awareness campaign.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the senior medics in this country, the royal colleges in this country, the pediatrics, the general practitioners, the psychiatrists. Sadly, they're all asleep at the wheel. At least the Americans are starting to have been for quite a while now. Jonathan Haidt being the classic example, the American Pediatric Association, the American Psychiatric Association, etc., are talking about this regularly. Mm. But sadly, in our country, it hasn't got any traction with those people yet.
Yeah. I want to ask you the same question that I asked Becky, Dr. Becky Foljam. Forgive me because it's quite a complicated question to ask. I'll try and get it right. But there's this sense that social media, I would say something like Twitter in particular, but maybe Facebook as well, they have a real habit of polarizing people onto very extreme sides of debates and arguments. There's not a lot of room for people who are in the maybe frame of mind.
Yes.
Social media. People like to really align themselves with one side a lot of the time. And in this debate around smartphones and children and the use of social media for children, I often wonder that it would be more helpful if people maybe in the health profession and education and government were to sort of take a position of not knowing if it's because of the social media that we see all this increase in mental health and anxiety issues, because it's been such a short amount of time, and as you say, a very short period of research. But I wonder if it's because so many people are on social media that either the majority are going, absolutely no, there's no evidence to show smartphones and social media are affecting people's ability to think straight. And then other people saying it's got to be social media. And it seems like that's actually potentially one of the causes of the life that we lead now with social media, isn't it?
Totally. I think there are a number of reasons.
It's like a catch-22.
One is the fact that people who spend a lot of time on social media are in denial about its adverse effects. So they're going to carry on regardless. Whatever you tell them, they're not going to listen to you. It's like being an alcoholic. You tell them your liver can fail, your blood, etc., or a smoker. It's the same thing. Mm. And perversely, they get pleasure. You see, what the big problem I have with Mark Zuckerberg et al. And what they've done is that they have capitalized on one basic human need, necessity, and that is recognition. Mm. Everybody wants recognition. These platforms give those people the ability to speak and get recognition. So that's a drug to them. Mm. If you take that away, they're instantly unhappy because the influencers have got thousands of people following them, and I hate the word influencers because they're not positive influencers most of the time. And that's what's going on there. People have now got an entity thanks to social media, and they are viscerally against anybody who says actually it's not good for you. Mm. Then, of course, the government in the country we live in, sadly, is paranoid of being accused of nanny statism, which I think is a tragic irony, because ultimately, who has to pick up the pieces when mental health illnesses skyrocket? It's the state that has to pick up the pieces. So therefore, that lends to this procrastination. What do we say? How do we say it? Are we going to offend somebody? Whereas in fact, when the Educational Select Committee looked at the evidence, they were very clear. Just like the Americans were very clear. They were very clear there's a clear link between causal link between excessive screen time and social media use. But yet Keir Starmer was very dismissive about it. The last government issued guidelines rather than outright ban, and that's the problem. And that then feeds into this narrative because the government is unwilling to take decisive action. And then you have the other group, the academics, who sit in their offices and do this research um, from institutions like Oxford and Cambridge, don't see what's happening at the coalface.
Yeah.
And they come up with these conclusions, which are published in broadsheets like the Times, etc. Oh, no, there's no clear link. And that's completely wrong, because what I see at the coalface is very clear. And it's a combination of these things which has created this perfect storm of the screen-demic.
Yes, it's interesting. I've only recently began to read, I suppose, what you would call research papers from academics. And there's not any warm data. There's not any real stories or case histories about the kind of stories that I've heard from you and Becky,
Mm-hmm.
and also the kind of stories that Kate and I heard on the Super Connected tour. That was in a way, and largely thanks to the Arts Council, actually, a research in the warm data of actually how do people feel about this, not to what do academics think about it.
What's the point? You speak to nursery workers, to primary school teachers, to secondary school teachers. They're in despair about this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very moving. And also very rousing when you talk about Mark Zuckerberg, which we'll talk about in a minute. But do you feel that there's a possibility for that? What we were just talking about, that there's a polarization. It's either there's something wrong with smartphones and social media, or there's nothing wrong with it. The maybe space in the middle is quite surprising, that given that it's the main victims of this would be children, that so few people are stopping to just say it might be social media, it might be that. Let's stop and spend more time finding out, instead of just carrying on with we don't have enough evidence, so we'll just keep going on until we do. If it was adults, I kind of understand it, but I don't understand where institutions are just carrying on when
Yeah,
it's children that are being affected.
it's an inconvenient truth, isn't it? Just like global warming at some point a number of years ago was an inconvenient truth.
Hmm.
And we have these libertarians who talk about children's rights. And I think, what about their rights to be protected from poison
Hmm.
that is there on social media? What about the child's rights to be protected from a fatal viral TikTok challenge? What about all of that?
Hmm.
And that's the problem when you live in a society, you live in democracy, that's fine. But the libertarians often have the sway in the argument, in the broadsheets, and in the policy-making corridors.
Hmm.
And that's the issue. You can see the same with assisted dying. That's obviously a new topic which is going to be discussed more and more.
Yeah.
In these armchair critics and armchair experts, like the academics, who don't see what's happening in the real face, able to have so much sway over policy and politicians. And it's this fear of being decisive for being accused of anti-statism. So we are talking about moderation. We're talking about being reasonable. We're talking about being sensible. We're not talking about stopping.
Hmm.
And at least alerting. My campaign is to alert parents so they can make up their own minds. If you know that something you're doing is potentially causing your child harm and potentially associated with changes in the brain, most self-respecting parents are going to sit up and take notice.
Hmm.
And say, maybe we should think about this more seriously. And that's what we're
Yes.
doing.
And maybe there's no harm in thinking about it more seriously.
Indeed. What's the downside to this?
Yeah,
Your
I
child
know.
will be outside more, will play more green time, less screen time. What's wrong with that?
I mean, you've seen Super Connected, so I don't need to explain that. I think that those who are against the narrative that you're
Mhm.
um, propagating clearly have something to lose by there being less phones and less apps in the hands of children.
Indeed.
Um, uh,
Commercial interests have just taken over.
yeah, let's talk about how we met actually, because it's quite an extraordinary way to meet somebody. And and you know, you watched Super Connected and you watched myself and Sarah performing the songs live. And I must say, when I wrote the songs and the script for the film, it was 6, 7 years ago, I never imagined I'd be performing it in a sort of private showcase for a pediatrician with an OBE behind their name. That was the last. That was the last thing I imagined, and it was, I would say, in front of the people in music and entertainment, film and theatre. I'm never nervous, but I was nervous for the first time. I was like, oh my God.
Couldn't tell. None of us could tell.
Spending, well, it's just spending so much time as my own kind of version of an armchair, not critic, but just thinking about ideas that I had about social media. And it was kind of my last transference addiction. With drug addiction, it takes many, you go to food, you go to fitness, you go to so many things. And I think social media was my last one, and that was the final kind of. That's it. I've got to, it got healthier as it went along, but then I realized with that, actually, this is terrible. That's why I started writing the album and the film. But yeah, I'm really fascinated just in terms of you having seen the story, which was, is based on a true story. But I'm not. I wasn't. Well, I am a researcher now, but I wasn't when I wrote the songs, and I certainly am not. In the medical or education profession, I'm just kind of going from my instinct. So it'd be great to hear what you thought about the Super Connected film in terms of
I thought it was
your own
really,
campaign.
yeah, I mean, I thought it was really powerful, true to life. It resonated with exactly what I have seen, what I've experienced. Your wife, for instance, consumed by your super connected wife, consumed by
My
social
on-screen wife.
your on-screen wife, consumed by social media and makeup and all of that, and just brought back memories of many of my friends, mature people, who behave like this. They can't live without this hit, this drug, dopamine from people, this corroboration, adulation from people. And then, of course, your daughter on screen, who was a prisoner in her own room, secondary to excessive screen time and social media. And that's what I see in real life. Parents helpless, not able to do anything when the teenagers are spending hours and hours and hours. And I thought your story was really well told and very true to life. And of course, the icing on the cake was a fantastic performance live in front of us. So overall, I loved the whole thing.
Oh, thank you. It was really really very special to be there with you and the other health professionals.
Thank you.
And an unusual meeting of, I suppose, arts and health all at
Yes.
once. Which really I think they're both doing similar things, just in very different ways, aren't they? Um, I I've heard you say his name 3 times, and of course, he was at the top of my list when I was working on Super Connected, more so with the songs, I think, than the film. Facebook, and well, we should refer to it as Meta now, as this sort of
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
the umbrella over Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. I always felt that that had the potential to become dangerous back in 2016 when I was writing Super Connected. But I really didn't imagine it would become quite as dangerous as it is now. And I say that only because of seeing Zuckerberg and the way he presents now as a CEO, and as a self-appointed visionary and leader of that was the idea with Super Connected. It was a joke to have this company constantly telling us that they were connecting people.
Yes. Yeah.
When I felt anything but. And of course they have the dial on how many likes and rewards that
Yes.
you
Yes.
get based on your usage. So if
Yeah.
you're not using it for a long time and you return to the platform, you'll be inundated with what appear to be all your friends liking or loving something that you say because you've not been there. So they give you the reason, the incentive to be
Mhm.
on it more often because their business is run on, advertising information
Yeah.
about you to the
Yeah.
third party. Um, and they've just recently created teen accounts for
Yes. Instagram.
Instagram. Is that just whitewashing and appropriating a problem that's bubbling all over the world at the moment in different quarters? Is that their way, do you think, of just saying, "Oh, we've got this"?
Yeah, I think it's so far they've just been paying lip service to it. When Zuckerberg was interrogated by the American Senate, he looked back at the parents and shed some crocodile tears.
Money.
And to build tools that empower parents.
So you
that
didn't
help
take
work with
any
law.
action. You didn't
That's
take
not
any
true,
action.
Senator.
You didn't fire anybody. You haven't
It's not
compensated
true.
a
That's
single
not-
victim.
that's
Let
not
me
what I
ask you
said.
this. Let me ask you this. There's families of victims here today. Have you apologized to the victims? Would you like to do so now?
Well,
they're here. You're on national television. Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures. Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
I'm sorry for everything that you've all been through. It's terrible. No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered. And this is why we invested so much and are going to continue doing industry-leading efforts to make sure that no one has to go through the types of things that your families have had to suffer.
Why, Mr. Zuckerberg, why should your company not be sued for this?
Which I thought was most disingenuous. They can see what's going on. They can see this is not going away. The Americans are enacting something called KISA, a enhanced version of our Online Safety Act, which I personally think is most inadequate. Our own Online Safety Act, there's just an enhanced version of that, so he can see what's going on. They can see the writing on the wall. So they're showing that they're acting rather than reacting. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's mainly window dressing, because this guy's, in my opinion, he's totally unscrupulous. He's not interested in anybody's welfare. And the biggest irony is you read that most of these people who run these apps don't allow their kids on these apps themselves, which is the biggest load of hypocrisy ever. So I think at the moment it's window dressing, but they recognize what's going on, and they know this has got a head of steam now, which is only going to get stronger and stronger.
Yeah. You mentioned how the children of Mark Zuckerberg and other CEOs, I suppose, in Silicon Valley, the people who are in control of social media companies and maybe device companies as well. I remember Steve Jobs once saying that he sent his school kids to a school that was not tolerant of tech. And it's interesting. I went to a Rudolf Steiner school,
Right.
and that I think is the kind of school that a lot of the children of the CEOs of tech companies in Silicon Valley go to, those schools, which are absolutely based on having an embodied childhood, not engaging too much with technology until a certain age, and not reading until you're 7. It's based on real gradual evolution, and and your growth sort of stepping forward with nature rather than getting stuck into all the exciting things that we have to get stuck into as adults. And I mean, I was really lucky. I sort of finished my education there. I just wondered if you thought there is a moment now for Steiner education potentially to be considered more in the mainstream, because certainly when I was at school, it was considered like an unusual school to go to. Um, Not for someone from an artist sort of family like me, but for a lot of people, it was a strange choice, and they were very unsupported and have continued not to be particularly supported in this country by the government. I just wondered if you thought that now might be a good time for them to be, considered as a way forward, given what we're looking at with technology and its impact.
I think it sounds very appealing. However, you've already alluded to the practical realities, and that is there'll be a lot of resistance to it because people are in denial, and the government is not going to sign up to something like that, and it's a real shame. I think there needs to be a stepwise approach to this problem. First of all, I think phones need to be banned in school on the 16th. Then phones need to be banned for smartphones, that is, need to be banned on the 16th period. And then there needs to be more and more focus on physical education, physical activities in school. And parents need to be counseled and educated that actually you cannot, with the best one in the world, create this sterile artificial environment where no risk exists, where everybody is a winner. Everybody can't be a winner. And I think the educational establishment in this country is run predominantly by libertarians, left-wing libertarians, who believe in allowing children to be creative. And when I put my oldest son into primary school, it was an open plan class, and I said, how? Meaning a number of classes next to each other, juxtaposed with each other, without any walls. So there's cross talk, cross noise, and that was supposed to be good for the development. And I said, are you people crazy? And that's the problem. That's the sort of establishment you're dealing with.
There is definitely a thin line between creativity and chaos.
And it was chaos.
Yeah,
because a child has
it's hard to tell the difference sometimes, but yeah.
Yes, indeed. But they will find their own way. No, they don't. They're not going to find their own way. That's why they're children. And they have to be nurtured in the right way. You can't let a 5 or 7-year-old find their own way. They'll find the easiest way and not study and talk to children around them.
Yeah.
So it's those misguided thoughts which will stand right steadfastly against what you're suggesting, sadly.
I want to get onto your 5 a day and as a brilliant way out of a Screen-demic. And to put it in context, when we toured Super Connected, I got the same feedback by a few people who said it was a bit ironic that I was presenting a story about the dangers of smartphones and addiction to technology and showing it on a screen. And of course, I said what I believe, which was that a lot of people gathering together around a big screen is a community activity and also one of great concentration. And I've never thought anything other than that being a beautiful experience since going to the cinema when I was a child. And I think it's very different to being at home with Netflix and swapping from channel to channel. I think that has some problems about concentration. I'm not sure it's that helpful, but definitely it's a bit like ritual, to be honest. It's like going somewhere and doing something together from the beginning until the end.
Mhm.
But you've said, and that's why I don't have a smartphone anymore, because I intuitively thought something very small like this all the time wasn't doing me any good. That I should have space and a bit of more of a panoramic
Yes.
perspective if I'm going to deal with technology, which I have to. I'm doing at the moment with a screen, and that's one of your core 5 a days, isn't it? That bigger screens are better.
Indeed. Yes, yes, because lots of opticians are now telling us, research from opticians and ophthalmologists is telling us that smaller screens, particularly the smartphones, are causing visual stress. And the number of children needing glasses has skyrocketed.
Mm.
It's the smartphone, the constant flashing images is making the eye muscles overreact, changing the shape of the eyes because the muscles are having to work so hard. They're
Mm.
not used to focusing like that. And that's basically led to massive increase in glasses for young children.
Mm.
Yes, absolutely. And
So
that's why parents, if you must give your child a screen, particularly a younger one, give your child a bigger screen.
Yeah, it's like I think somebody in the well-being industry once said to me, if you're on computers a lot, to try to go out and just look at the sky every, I don't know, half an hour or something, just to kind of reconnect with the actual world that you're in and visually for your eyes to be
Yeah.
able to experience a natural kind of not strain, but energy that you're using to look.
Very sensible advice. And there's this new entity called TechNeck, spending hours and hours in front of a screen. Lots of people are getting postural problems, neck problems, and another diagnosis you're going to hear more and more about called digital dementia. And
I
this is
have that
pertaining
written
to
down
adults.
here. Sorry, yes. Tell me about digital dementia.
This is pertaining to adults, and it's basically if your vocation is because of your vocation, you uh, have to be in front of a screen during the working day. And if your habits make you uh, be imprisoned by a screen for the leisure time during the evening as well, you're not going out, you're not exercising, there's not much green time, there's more screen time, and that predisposes you to early onset dementia called digital dementia. And there was a study looking at 460,000 adults who have a lifestyle that I've described. During the day, because of the vocation on the screens, in the evening, they're stuck on screens by choice. And they are now, this study showed that the brain scans are showing abnormalities in the brain of these people. So the Screen-demic is relevant to the entire population,
Mm,
from infants to toddlers to teenagers to young adults to older people.
yeah.
Because being in front of a screen, particularly during leisure, you're just passive, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's not an active act of engagement. And
Yeah.
if you're doing that all the time, it just changes the neurons in the brain. So we will hear more and more about this, tragically, because people are, again, no fault of theirs, ignorant about this problem.
I have to ask you this because you've seen the film and listened to the album with Super Connected. I'm really concerned about sound. Is this habit that all of us have got into of looking at stuff constantly, potentially something that we can replace with more listening activity? Because yeah, that's what I was, in context of music, was that even making music, as a musician, myself and most of my generation make music with computers. I've actually just switched to an older digital machine where that doesn't have a screen. So I've halved my screen time with making music now. But even listening to music, that's something that I think anybody under the age of 25 now thinks of looking at their phone when they're about to listen to music. It's all
Yeah.
dependent on looking. Do you think that that might be a thing that we could introduce? Like nobody practices listening or closing your eyes and, imagining when you're hearing sound.
Most definitely, as long as it's within the recommended decibel parameters. I think listening is definitely the way forward. It's very healthy. But curious, interesting you say that because I was on the train today. For some technical reasons, it was packed. There were a couple of carriages which were missing. So a lot of people had to stand, and I had to stand as well from Leicester to King's Cross, St. Pancras. And in the vicinity, everybody had the earpieces in, each and every person. And I thought to myself, I wonder what research is going to tell us about the hearing of these people who constantly got devices in their ears. This is a watch this space type of issue. Because I'm concerned that again, there's going to be this bombardment of the hearing apparatus, and it's going to show some strain from this constant. Because you go to the gym, which I do, they're on it. They're traveling, they're on it. They're walking around, they're on it. This can't be good because it's not normal.
Yeah.
It's again about a balance. It's again about moderation.
I'm just about to say it's not even the like trying to replace looking with listening. It's actually just we've all got to a point, haven't we, in just being excessive with everything.
Yes.
It's funny when you talk about everyone being on headphones. I was so excited, I think in the pandemic to get my first pair of noise cancelling headphones.
Yeah.
Or halfway through after the first lockdown, I think in 2020, I've stopped using the noise cancelling because I've found it's disconnecting me from my environment so much that when I take them off, I really feel a bit like everything's a bit too intense from the sound. My ears are like my main thing. So, and I wondered, do you think that has an effect on any young kids who use noise cancelling, which absolutely sort of shuts down all peripheral sound, which is great for musicians when you're concentrating and making music. But I
Yeah.
wonder, as a normal experience, how healthy that is.
I have no idea, no doubt, sorry, it's unhealthy. And research is telling us that even from a young age, you give a toddler, not I'm not talking about headphones, but I'm talking about devices, they don't connect with the environment. And if you give a toddler headphones or a teenager headphones, it's the same thing, but it's just a different organ taking their attention away from what's around them. So we're seeing lots of children with poor attention spans because they're not used to focusing on something for long enough. Teachers are telling us that they're not able to hold the attention of their children like they used to be able to because they used to be short, sharp videos and reels or whatever they're called. So it's a big problem. This disconnect from the environment, from the surroundings, is A, unnatural, B, pathological, and is going to be more manifest as time goes on. Yes, it's a massive issue.
It's so brilliant listening to everything that you're saying in context of your provenance, in your profession, and I can't help smiling with irony that we will be sharing it in reels, but then I think in fact that's ended up being the only thing that my company use social media for now is stuff to raise people's awareness about the dangers of it. And I think a lot of people are having to do that. But I wondered, it be a nice way to conclude with you actually going through the 5 a day in
Sure. Yeah,
order for
yeah.
parents and potentially for adults as well, but definitely for parents who want to really feel like they're doing something proactive for their children and their screen use.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure. So I've created this 5-a-day infographic, and we've now polished it and updated it into its final version. Health professionals for safer screen have come on board. And essentially, I've broken it down for 5 tips for 3 different age groups. Tip number 1, for 0 to 2 years of age, the only screen time should be video chatting. Tip number 2, between 2 and 5 years of age, the screen time should be limited to 30 minutes maximum, and preferably educational programs and educational content. Tip number 3, if you must give your child a screen, then give your child a bigger screen, because smartphones cause visual stress and are associated with a massive increase in children needing glasses. Tip number 4, do your best to avoid using a digital device to settle your child as a digital dummy or a digital pacifier. It is not a de facto babysitter. We understand pressures parents are under, but actually it starts to become a habit which then runs away from you. And tip number 5, the very, very important and emerging concept of sleep hygiene. Sleep, as I've already explained, is an active, restorative, regenerative process for the brain. And I recommend for 0 to 5s, at least 2 hours before bedtime, there should be no screens. So that should be incorporated into the bedtime routine for children, 2 hours before bedtime. For 6 to 10-year-olds, what do I say? Tip number 1, for the first hour after waking up, there should be no screens and no going onto social media. The reason for that is back to the dopamine rush. Studies are telling us that if children go onto screens and apps first thing in the morning, that causes a dopamine rush, which reduces their ability to concentrate during the school day. Tip number 2, duration of screen time. As I said, the campaign, Tackling the Screen-demic, Raising the Awareness, the health professionals campaign is about moderation, about being sensible. It's about being reasonable. So what I'm recommending is that recreational screen time for 6 to 10-year-olds should be 1 or 2 hours per day during the week, and up to 2 hours per day on weekends. So there's allowance, a reasonable amount of time. Tip number 3, physical exercise every day, half an hour to an hour, is really, really important, from the heart, for the lungs, for the muscles, for the brain as well. Tip number 4, screen-free time together. Really, really important. When you're having a meal together, when you're out together, when you're having dinner together, when you're on holiday together, when you're traveling together, please put your phones away. Talk to each other, interact with each other, communicate with each other, interact with the environment. Do what normal human beings do or should do. Tip number 5, again, sleep hygiene. And for the older children, we say 1 hour before bedtime, put your screens away. Allow your brains to slow down, calm down, relax, and then switch off. And for 11 to 17-year-olds, tip number 1 is, again, no screen time for an hour after waking up. Tip number 2 is about the duration. We say up to 2 hours on weekdays and up to 2 or 3 hours on weekends. That's tip number 2. 3 is, again, exercise, half an hour to an hour a day. And 4 and 5 are similar: screen-free time and sleep hygiene. Charge your phones outside, put your phones on silent. There are other alarm clocks available that will wake you up in the morning. You do not need a mobile phone to wake you up. And that's basically the 5 a day, from 0 to 17 years of age.
Thank you. That's such an amazing piece of work that you've done, and we're going to share that infographic. I've got the PDF, and we'll make it a link to that. And I just want to say thank you for the conversation, but also for putting that together. It's one thing to voice opinions and and share our thoughts and feelings. It's another one to become creative enough. And I know that is now on the NHS what you created and what you've just described. I think it's such an amazing contribution, and I'm sure in years to come, people will look back on that as a first step into a slightly more humane future, with not to get rid of tech, but certainly a balance in the way that we use it, and not abuse it.
Indeed. Thank you. I certainly hope so. And thank you for the support. It's been a pleasure meeting you. As I said, we were all, and I particularly was blown away by how Super Connected resonated with what I'm seeing in real life, and loved your live performances. It was a real treat.
Thank you, Sanjiv. Well, we'll see each other, I'm sure, at another event,
indeed.
a screen-free event soon.
Indeed.
Thanks
Great
so
to
much. Thank you.
Pleasure. Take care, Tim.
Bye-bye.
La, 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 la.